Say a good prayer for the North, for the Yankees of the North.
Yeah. Am I sitting on somebody's spot?
Oh, that was yours. I think it was.
Big black
I didn't look at the name plate yet. That's right.
You're right.
You doing okay? How you doing,
How you doing? I'd like to call to order the meeting, special strategic planning committee meeting, and roll call. Suzanne, everyone's here except for Councilman Behringer. We do expect him later on, however. And with that, I'd like Councilman Hillesbeck to lead us in prayer.
Bow your head, please. Heavenly Father, Lord, we're thankful for this meeting place. We're thankful for the beautiful weather. Father, we ask your guidance, your wisdom, your intervention. Help us with the decisions we make tonight so that it'll be for the betterment of the residents of Ascension Parish. Father, we ask forgiveness of the times we fail you. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Congratulations to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Just a small background for anyone that did not know what we have done prior. We are discussing the proposed Ascension Parish drainage ordinance, and with that we were tackling some individual concerns of the different council members and people of the parish had on some adjustments to the drainage ordinance that we started about 18 months ago. We are trying to finalize and have this presented at the next council meeting. So last week we discussed the upstream and downstream effects of development, and before we go any further, Mr. Sonji and Mr. Rue, do you have any further comments on the upstream and downstream? I know you had talked about maybe simplifying some wording.
I did not develop the wording, but there was some concern about the individual homeowners having to do engineering studies, like if they were going to construct a new home, and that is not the intent of what we were trying to do. If you will turn to the very end, page 7, this would be item Roman numeral 12D. It states drainage impact studies, construction plans, final calculations must be performed under the direction of a qualified professional engineer. I think that people are reading that, construing that if they build a home in the floodplain that they're going to have to hire an engineer to do a drainage study. That's not the intent. We can certainly, if it's the pleasure of the committee, we could certainly put some language that individual homeowners could submit plans to the floodplain administrator or director of public works, for review, just to strengthen the fact that we're not looking for engineering studies for.
Would you do that, please, so that there is no question?
We add that language.
Motion by Mr. Hillensbeck to install that language for individual homeowners. Second by
make it very clear, Mike.
Mr. Todd Lambert.
Engineer is not required for an individual homeowner.
Correct. Any further discussion? Any opposition? Good. We were hoping to solve that problem.
Okay.
Thank you. I think we had some more information since last week. There was a lot of discussion about actually reducing the runoff through developments, and it was brought up about the St. Tammany ordinance, where they have a reduction of 25% in their ordinance on runoff through their property. Mr. O'Neill Parrington, who is our lawyer on this, has made some inquiries into St. Tammany, and O'Neill, would you tell us what you found out and what our options are?
Well, first off, St. Tammany does not...
Could you do it at the...
I think, can I talk?
Okay, that's fine.
St. Tammany does not have a negative impact for subdivisions. It's only for commercial, industrial, or institutional, so it does not apply to subdivisions. But what St. Tammany has is a complex drainage plan where they have 5 drainage districts throughout. They have strict fill requirements, and those fill requirements apply to everyone. What we just talked about of not having a plan for an individual homeowner, that doesn't fly in St. Tammany Parish.
Okay.
So, in speaking with their people, they feel they're able. No one has contested that negative impact, and one of the reasons is because everyone participates in mitigation, from the smallest to the biggest. And so they've sold it like that, but they've got a complex drainage ordinance, and I don't feel that with on the proposals that we have that you could have a negative impact ordinance, because it's not applying. We'd be treating people differently, whereas in St. Tammany they really do not. If you're a small homeowner and you want to do an addition to your house and you're in a floodplain, you've either got to elevate or mitigate, one or the other, and you've got to come in with engineering studies to show that.
So their requirement would be engineering studies on individual homes.
They even to the point where in reviewing their ordinance, if you get a variance on some of their requirements, you have to purchase credits.
Okay.
And I don't think that was the intent of this ordinance here. So my suggestion is that if you're going to eliminate all that, if you're going to have exceptions, you really can't go with a negative impact ordinance.
Okay. So that was the feedback that we got into. But we had asked O'Neill to make some further inquiries, and it was one of the reasons that it was suggested by legal that we settle on zero impact, because that's something we could put across the board. Is there anybody that would favor doing the reduction across the board to make it legal?
Talking about the negative impact?
Yes.
If you do it for one, you're going to have to do it for all, and it's going to be a little, I don't know if the parish is ready quite for that yet. St. Tammany's in a almost below sea level area where they at, and they have a lot of areas, from what O'Neill's telling me, they will not let them build on the property.
Right.
They will put a moratorium on that section of the property, so.
I guess the question I'd have is, Mr. Rue, trying to do a 10% negative impact bill, would that be feasible if it was across the board, or would that be asking too much of our homeowners?
It would require a study.
It's going to require a study, yeah.
It would be putting too much burden on the individual, I think, because they have to produce the data. They have to get an engineering review if they're going to produce. Any data you produce, has to come from a licensed engineer. Now, a lot of cases, like we just said, if you don't have to produce the data, you don't have to hire an engineer. But if you are required to produce data, it has to come from an engineer. And if you do it across the board, I think it can put an undue burden on the individual property owner.
Do you know what our ratio is of individual homes being built compared to developments, subdivisions now?
I don't know. I can find out. Most of your individual developments is either a large tract of land, which are very few, or family partition type developments, where individual landowner will separate his property to his family. And a lot of individual property individual homes outside of subdivisions are family partition type. And again, that's going to be an undue burden on those type of people.
What if we were to do a negative impact but exempt family petitions? I mean, we give them special consideration as it is.
That's the problem.
I'm not recommending that that's the problem, is that I think if you look at the planning and zoning agenda every month, we're probably doing 8 to 15 family partition lots every month. So that started adding up. And if you start exempting some, you can do whatever, you can pass the ordinance, but I'd be uncomfortable
legally
exempting.
it might not stand for a challenge.
That's correct.
All right. Okay.
I would like to see us, if we can get something with zero impact across the board, then as we continue to develop in the next year or two, we may be able to modify this and maybe even partition some districts if we see that we need some greater effect to it. I think we can fine-tune this and get to where we really see the effects. If we have severe problems in certain areas, we may be able to do more where it's more accepted. But I'm like, Mr. Lambert, I think we're going to have trouble with a great deal of acceptance in the large areas of the parish to do this on a negative impact to get this passed and up and running.
Also, I don't believe, Mr. Chairman, that the negative impact is really treats people fairly, which I believe is what our role is. It's going to put undue hardships on some and exempt others. No, now we need to strictly enforce this zero impact. And I've talked to several people who they were faced with a development right next door that all the engineering said it was going to be zero impact, but they knew just by their knowledge of that particular area that there would in fact be impact. So I think I agree with sticking to zero impact across the board, but let's police it very thoroughly just to make certain that we don't put any water on anyone else.
Hey, Mike, I guess the zero impact's fine, but when we go in a flood zone area that we know we got flooding coming from upstream, downstream, seem like we should better have something in a variance. I don't know if Bill through DPW or what that we could control that. You know, that's our biggest issue right here. Zero impact is fine, but they're controlling just the property that their subdivision is built on, and not the sheet flow that's coming into that property. They don't have to address. Because they basically have to, if they got a storage area in that property. Now Bill has brought something to my attention that he is, working with. But say there's water coming across from the west and goes into this, and it's a storage yard. Well, they're going to use this property to build a subdivision. And all they worried about for the retention ponds is the water that comes off of that property. But what happens to all that water that came into that property? Right. It can't get to that pond because they're not using it for that pond anymore. The pond is not being used for that. Right. So you have a big area of storage, but that water is going to have to back up on these people, say the west side of this particular subdivision I'm talking about.
We did have a meeting with the people proposing that subdivision, and that is exactly what we discussed with them, was accounting for the fact for the water that was being stored. That's not the normal site that you see. I mean, most sites are not necessarily storing water. This one was. But regarding downstream, it gets so hard to define what is a downstream problem and what is that limit, because you got, and O'Neill can address this better than I, because you're starting to define when a person can and cannot develop their property. And you're starting to say, well, there's a problem downstream, so just because you waited later to develop, you can't. That's the legality in that I think we've got to be, we would have to be careful with.
So with what we have now, we could stop what I'm talking about for as watershed.
That's correct. I mean,
they would have to do something to catch the water coming in also.
Right. That's correct.
As of right now, the subdivision is not okay.
But no, I mean, we always look at how much watershed is coming onto a piece of property, making sure that that's done. The difference in this case is the property itself was storing. It was a wetland. It was storing some water, and we have had those discussions with them. That, why this particular site was different. But and you're always going to have sites and situations,
unique situations
that are unique that just are not going to be covered, and our judgment takes over there. But this was written for pretty much the majority of the cases that are coming before us.
But you have taken care of that. We do have some. We do have some leeway in there that DPW and the review agency can address flow. Okay, well that helps us feel a little bit better about that, because that was one of the issues that people had a hard time accepting on that, if we were looking at that. And I think it's something that we need to make sure we just bring attention to on a new development, and it can be that or an individual development also.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Another issue. I got emails from several individuals asking that we attach the drainage impact study policy as it's written, attach it, make it a part of the drainage ordinance. Mr. Sonny, would you address that issue? And it's to strengthen, as I understand, it's to strengthen the ordinance and also give the existing residents maybe some future protection against possible flooding. They want the drainage impact study to be attached as part of
to the subdivision.
To the ordinance.
Yeah. Can we do that? Is that doable?
You can do that. I think that in my mind, there are different purposes that the ordinance does and that the policy does. The ordinance is intended to be the intentions of what you're trying to achieve. It's passed by the council. It's not a document that you would typically change very often. I mean, maybe in a year or 2, 3, or whatever. The policy is really approved by the Planning Commission. The intention of the policy is to give the consulting engineers that are developing these plans a better idea of what it is we are looking for when they make these submittals to us. Okay. The reason, and I'm aware that there's several people out there that want the policy attached. The reason that I believe they're asking for that is in that policy it talks about looking at these detention ponds and analyzing them for a 10-year storm and a 25-year storm and a 100-year storm. That's fine, but my point is you can only design to one of those. You've got to pick it. Is it you're designing the pond to a 10-year storm. We've had the discussions about the streets grades being set according to that. You can look at what happens with a 25-year storm. You can look at what happens with a 100-year storm, but you got to design it by one. And I think that there's a false sense of security by making engineers run these numbers and look at 25, look at 100-year. Go back to the discussion. Roads are protected to a 10-year storm. Structures are protected to a 100-year storm. Let's don't make any doubt about that. But taking a detention pond design and analyzing it for 3 different storm events, personally, I don't know that that is the right thing to do. We intend, in fact, Sean has already drafted a revised drainage impact policy that's going to be very consistent with this ordinance if it passes. And we intend, as soon as the ordinance is passed, to go back to the Planning Commission and have a new drainage impact policy adopted. It doesn't, the policy doesn't change anything in the ordinance. The ordinance is the gospel. That's what the council's mandated. The policy is simply directives to the engineers to give them a better idea of what they need to submit to us, maybe how the calculations are run, that type of thing. So I disagree. I don't think that the policy needs to be attached to the ordinance.
We do have an option, though, if, as a review agency and the DPW makes a recommendation, that we can go above that. Above a 10-year. If conditions...
We have the ability in the ordinance when we're talking about analyzing an existing stream going through the property and maintaining that water surface profile. We have that option
to maintain the profile.
We have the option to go higher than a 10-year event. And Mr. Rue and I have had several discussions. We're pleased with the way that's worded right now. We have that ability to ask for more, and we can. Let me say this too. When we say that it's designed to a 10-year event, we are making sure that they are accounting for tailwater conditions in the design, something that was not done before. We're saying that the lowest elevation of a road, meaning the lowest elevation in the gutter, and then streets have longitudinal slopes up and down draining the water to the catch basin. The lowest possible elevation in the road is gutter elevation is at that 10-year event. So at a 10-year event, we're not flooding any part of the road.
Right.
So, I mean, you can run all the numbers, but we feel that that protection, because everything, the whole road system and all the lots are higher than that 10-year storm event, and in some cases quite a bit higher. You know.
Yes.
Well, just regarding those, the policy. I know if we attach it to the ordinance, then it can only be changed or amended by ordinance as well. And I guess I want to know, is that a good thing or a bad thing? If it makes our policy more rigid and more difficult to change, then I'd be more in favor of attaching it to the ordinance. You know, but if it has to be a living thing that we have to continually change,
it's again, there's nothing in the policy that's going to be contradictory in any way to the ordinance that you pass. We're not, it would be, if it would be ordinance. In other words, the ordinance has the hierarchy here. Again, the policy is simply a, for instance, to switch gears a little bit, there's a traffic impact study requirement, okay? Well, there's a traffic impact policy that the Planning Commission passes that tells the consulting engineers certain size subdivisions, what kind of study you have to do, and that type thing. So the policy is really intended to be a guide, a working guide to the consultants on how they prepare their studies and what they submit. It fully supports the ordinance. So there's nothing in the policy that's going to be contradictory. I think the current policy has some contradictions, good or bad, with the ordinance we're fixing to pass. That's why as soon as this passes, we're going to go to the Planning Commission and say, would you, and we'll suggest, I'd be happy to include y'all, the strategic planning, if you want to see that policy. But I think you'll find there's nothing contradictory in it. It's more about the detail of what are we looking for in a drainage impact study, what type of computer programs are we looking for all these different scenarios. But it has nothing to do with setting the laws and the standards. And
So if we did attach it, it would just muddy the water, is what you're saying?
if you attach the current one, it would be very, at times, contradictory.
Or even the new one. Even the new one.
Well, I'll solve it. I'd like to this time make a motion that we do attach the final revised drainage impact study policy after it's revised, that becomes part of this ordinance.
I'll second.
And I just think
we have it written. We can actually attach it at this point if you want to.
Well, we could take a look at it,
Okay.
Because I just want you to know there's a lot of people out there that have a lot of concern about this, and I think it would give them some comfort knowing that it's also part of the ordinance, and kind of alleviate some of the
Right.
some
And
of
I
their
think
fears.
that, frankly, I think there are some contradictions between that policy and your current ordinance.
Right.
And that's where you start to get into trouble, is people see the document and they don't really maybe understand the difference between the two. But if they're contradictory, no one knows which one to believe. But
Right.
I have no problem. I mean, we have it drafted.
Yeah,
We can attach it and attach it to the what we present to the council.
And you
when
got
we go
enough
to-
copies? We just go through it right quick.
I don't have it
You want to
here.
go through or talk us through the changes if you got it with you? What?
I don't have it with me here tonight.
Okay.
but,
Well, my motion is still
we
is
can
to
get it
attach
to you.
the final revised
Second.
drainage impact
Yes, and I'll
study
support-
policy.
I'll
Make
support
it
that
part
motion.
of the ordinance.
There's a motion by Mr. Hillenbeck, second by Mr. Lambert, to attach that policy as Michael has understood. Any further
After
discussion?
the final
The
revisions.
completed policy with
Yeah, the
with all
completed
revisions.
policy.
After final revisions.
Okay. Any objections? That being done, Ms. Suzanne, please attach that as an adoption. The next thing is fill under house pads. There was some discussion on if we're going to have fill under house pads in a floodplain, and if so, how much, any restrictions. Again, Mr. Rue and Mr. Fongie, what are your thoughts and recommendations?
We'd like to attach, yes, on the waivers on F that you have under 6F. That's where we intentionally want to put it right there.
Right.
Or
This
eliminate
has
the waiver.
gotten a lot of discussion before, and right or wrong, this is where the direction that we were given. There was one discussion about taking a certain size house and saying if it had less than 2 feet of fill, you wouldn't have to do it. And we felt that was could be very troubling from an enforcement standpoint. The decision was made is that to basically make the requirement and state that waivers to this section, due to a property owner's inability to generate fill credits, may be made on a case-by-case basis by the Director of Public Works. as we've told some of you, or as we've discussed in the past, you have a piece of property, it has a creek running through it, they can generally go down to that lower part of the property, dig out the dirt that they need, bring it up, and build their house pad. Certain property owners may not be able to do that. They may not have the ability to generate the credit. And it was determined that, this is where we were talking earlier, that they can go to DPW, floodplain administrator, this is the size house I'm building, and they would be able to make that judgment at the Department of Public Works. What was added to that, I think what Councilman Lambert is referring to, is that if the parish council requests it, DPW must periodically report to the Drainage Board a list of all waivers issued. And that is the check by which you're making sure DPW is just not granting these on a, you know.
The only issue I have with the waiver is, say, on the same highway, same neighborhood, we have a constituent comes up and DPW gives them the waiver, and down the road, they don't see the difference in the situation. You know, DPW is looking at it, but the people down the road say, well, you give it 5 houses down, the waiver. You know, so it's kind of putting, you know, it's kind of opening the doors up, I think, with the waiver, where if we had something specific in the ordinance.
And I think that was discussed, and after looking at, and I went through the parish, and so did Mr. Riddle and Mr. Orange. I know everyone else is going through that. We have obviously a number of sites that we cannot afford to have individual homeowners building up in the floodplain. It just, there are people that will be flooding or will be raising the water profile behind them, upstream from them. So we know that we cannot afford, if we're going to pass a drainage ordinance, we cannot afford to just allow everyone to build up under their pads of their house. So the alternative is to have no one build up under the pads of their house, either to mitigate or to elevate. And we wanted, the thought behind this was to get some kind of way where they had places in the parish that, according to Mr. Rue and Mr. Sonji, can be identified as as pool areas within the floodplain, and areas that have flow across it. And that, if you can demonstrate to DPW that it's more of a pool area, then you would be allowed to have fill under your pad, house pad, as opposed to a flow caused by streams, overflooding of streams area, as a way to allow some people to be able to do that, and as a compromise between all or nothing. So we're at that point right now. I understand Mr. Lambert's position, and it's something that we have to be very careful about, is that, you know, exactly how do we make that decision. And I think if Mr. Rue can come up with some criteria from the floodplain manager, and maybe on FEMA recommendations or something like that as a policy, it would sure make it a lot easier on us to be able to explain, because that is going to be the first thing that happens. We're going to have some people that are allowed to do it and some people that are not. So is that something that we can explain out after it happens?
I think so. I mean, first of all, most ordinances like this that I've seen do allow some means of a waiver or an exception. I mean, you're just going to have situations where someone may not be able to do it. And, you know, you don't want to get in a legal situation where you're denying them the ability to build. How DPW chooses to mechanically enforce this, I'm not trying to propose that in the ordinance. Again, I'm just trying to state the intent. Mr. Rue is going to have to get with his people that issue permits and decide that someone comes in to pull a permit to build a home. Somewhere on that checklist, is it in the flood zone? If it is in the flood zone, notification to them, and what elevation is your property at? How high do you have to build it? I mean, most communities have processes and forms, and in some cases, engineers, surveyors are required to simply shoot elevations and grades and determine, where's the ground at, where's the flood zone, how much fill are we talking about here. But those mechanics or those processes is something that Bill Rue and the permit office are going to have to establish. Again, there's no need to establish them until an ordinance passes, but you really don't want to get into that in the ordinance. That's just something that the mechanics have to.
Bill, is that something that DPW and planning can do in a policy that we can live with?
Yes, but it's going to take some time, and to get to that point, just like Michael said, you need the ordinance in place, and we need to start looking at what comes up. We need to take it case by case, analyze it. And I go back to the classic, which I've said last time. We have to look at the like in the case of family partition, how big the lots are. Are they available? Or do they have the ability to, if it's big enough to pull dirt fill from that same area somewhere? If not, what we don't want to do is get in a situation where you have a family partition, for example, and the lots are fairly small, and you give the ability for one landowner to put fill under his house pad and 10 foot out. But as the family partition develops, and each one is allowed to do that, now you may have 10 acres of all fill. You see, so we have to look at all these situations and see, put a lot of things together: the size property, size house, the flow go elevation. Again, it's going to be very complicated, and to explain this at every in detail in the ordinance would be very, very difficult right now. So we would, going back, we would really suggest that we use a waiver type system where we can analyze it case by case.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Well, in light of that, then, how about if we, I don't know, if we're giving a lot of waivers, if we're giving any waivers at all, I think I'd like to know about it without having to ask for that information. I think I would like the council to be regularly reported to about who is receiving waivers, and then that information becomes public record. Is it possible then that we can change item F, where it says if requested by the parish council? This is in Roman numeral 6, bullet point F.
We're requesting it right now.
If requested by the parish council, can we just delete that? Because we're going to say and change periodically to quarterly.
A lot of times, waivers are only, in fact, approved by the council. A waiver, different terminologies. I mean, you could have a situation where the facts are presented to Mr. Rue for a permit, and he says what the regulations are, and they say, well, I can't do that. And he says, well, you've got to bring that to just like
we don't want to get to politicizing it. We want it handled.
And nonetheless, I think this is information that should be regularly reported to us anyway.
Okay. So you want it automatic. You want it automatic.
We have a motion that the council now request it, and so just delete if requested by the parish council, because we are requesting.
That's correct.
And also, if we could change that instead of periodically to something like, I don't know, quarterly or semi-annually or
quarterly.
I would say monthly or quarterly.
Bill, what you approve, so we'll know. And, what
quarterly would be fine.
Each council member's district.
Everybody comfortable?
Quarterly. That's fine.
Any objection to that?
Question.
Todd.
Yeah, Michael, there again with the waivers. I know the planning commission has some authority on waivers. Happened in my district where we didn't know about it till after the fact. It was a 4-acre lot that they split into 3 lots. Was told by the first individual that owned the property that he couldn't do that. Guy buys the property, comes back, planning commission gives him a waiver. We know nothing of the sort, so it doesn't come back to us. The planning commission has the authority to give a waiver. They gave a waiver. It wasn't family partition. It was a waiver splitting this 4 acres into 3 lots off of a private road.
That's a different.
But what I'm saying is that's why I got a little problem with the still waivers. Why that got accepted when it's supposed to be illegal?
Yeah, most communities, waivers have to go to the council or
Waiver.
planning commission, but in Ascension Parish, the planning commission, as I understand it, does have that authority. That is why in this section we're stating that waivers can be made case by case by the director of the Department of Public Works. In other words, we're specifying who can make that.
So we're going to put it on Bill's shoulder.
Yeah. And this is through the floodplain administrator.
And that means the salary goes up too, since
Yeah.
the grant waiver?
Well, the floodplain administrator goes up for the other. Okay, Ms. Suzanne, you have those changes? Yes, Roy. Yes.
The question is, I'm trying to help us understand how to bring this into the realm of what Mr. Rue's going to have to deal with. Is I know of a lot of situations right now where you're talking with I'm as a builder, I'm talking to somebody who comes to me and says, "Hey, I want you to build this house over here." And so we'll start talking. Yeah, it's in the flood zone. Well, yeah. Well, I've been having this dirt hauling. We've already got this pad built. How through this ordinance could we as a parish tell a landowner, you can't build up this land that's in a flood zone, even though he might not be building his house to 2 years from now? I don't know. I don't know the policing side of that. I don't know the enforcement side, and I don't know that I have a solution. But I'm raising the question to you.
And we thought about that a little bit. Through floodplain management, but the only way we can get the process started is through the addressing system. In other words, if you're going to build a house somewhere and it's a vacant piece of property, you have to get an address on it. And when that address is, you submit your application for the address, then it goes over to the floodplain manager to review it before that address can be given out. And if the floodplain manager looks at the elevation, looks at the circumstance, the size piece of property, the elevation, the floodplain, the flood zone, then they get involved before the address is given. So if you don't get an address, you can't go any further with it. So we're going to have to use that mechanism. And because without an address, you can't get a permit, you can't get your plat.
I want people to know I've been involved with a couple other parishes lately in dealing with this and what is happening with the new FEMA regulations and everything, and they are very, 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 very strict on allowing permitting of houses and making sure elevations are correct and making sure that there is no impacts. And they are simply not permitting, and unless they do what they're supposed to. And I think it's, regardless of what we're in a different situation now than we were a year ago or 2 years ago. We are developing in different areas, and we are developing in more sensitive areas. And I think that the word has to get out from the parish. We have to all do a very good job of educating everyone in Ascension Parish about our flood areas and where you develop and what you're allowed to do. And people are going to have to inquire. And that's just the facts of the way things are today. Because if you do not, people have been, I've seen insurances cut off, I've seen permitting not be allowed and things, and people has to follow a certain thing. So the fact of the matter is, I think by us having these public meetings, by DPW hopefully getting a process that we will continue to follow, that from the very beginning we'll educate and let people, inform people very much so what are they supposed to do. I think that's the only way we can do it. It's never going to be an easy way.
Well, there's no doubt that in respect to what the ordinance is trying to do, that on a major event, I mean, you can build a home with, flow through with a raised foundation, with a raised subfloor, not a problem. Okay, it can be done. We're demonstrating it at LSU on the house project. A concern would be, is there enough meat in your ordinance that if you have a situation where you've got a massive buildup of earth on a private piece of property, he never did get the address because he wasn't that far along in the permit process. Is there enough meat in the ordinance that DPW could say to you, I'm sorry, you have impeded a situation, this was the ordinance, this is when it was adopted, and physically make them remove the fill? Again, just a question that I'm just not sure how we would, as a parish, deal with it.
I don't know. Well, in fact, I don't think we have that type of authority in the ordinance as it is. But, however, we do have the authority to say that he cannot put one thing on that piece of property until he complies with the ordinance, which is removing the field. Yeah, because for the permit to put something. Apparently, if he's building that up for something, he's building it up for a purpose, or some kind of structure. And then we go from that standpoint. When he does come in from that, we withhold everything, and he cannot place anything on that piece of property until he complies with the ordinance.
I mean, if somebody trying to circumvent the ordinance, they can't stop them there. If somebody has already 3 months ago built up on their property, they are grandfathered in, and they may continue. And all they have to do is show that they've done that already.
This becomes where we're really going. I think, Mr. Bill, what we really need to do is work with Laverne and to the home builders, put this word out to the builders so that as you're meeting with upcoming clients,
Yes.
we'll be able to put the word out and say, hey.
And Bill, that might be something that we have where we call a working meeting and a discussion on a teaching thing where you can get all the home builders there, and like we have those workshops for the new commission members, we could have a workshop for home builders where we can explain that so they can get the word across to the homeowners exactly what's going on. Mr. Hillenbeck.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one last thing, and I guess direct the question to Mr. Sanji. Michael, do we have the language in this ordinance that allows DPW or the engineer review agency, the agent, to hold up a development if we know that there is a known problem, either upstream or downstream of the development, that they can hold up, not stop the development, but hold the development up until such time the known existing problem is addressed. Do we have that language in this ordinance?
I don't know that we have the language in the ordinance, but
is there flexibility in there that allows
just the process, say residential subdivision developments, they go through the planning commission, they have to get construction plans approved by us. After that, we hold pre-construction meetings. Sean makes 2 or 3 check visits during their construction. We do a final inspection. So that process is pretty well monitored. The commercial process has really not been monitored in the past. I do believe with the passage of this ordinance, they're going to have to do a whole lot more engineering on all commercial sites, and we could certainly talk with Bill about policing that better on commercial sites. So when people are apply for a permit and they produce plans to say what they're going to do, if they don't do them, yes, there is the ability with occupancy permits to go in and stop and make them corrected before occupancy permits are issued. I think the real difficult situation is what was just described, is that someone takes it upon themselves to begin placing a whole lot of fill in the flood zone or adjacent to a channel, and they haven't applied for a permit because they may not be building anything at the time. That is the enforcement part, and I don't know what, O'Neill would have to answer that. I don't know that it's the prudent place to put enforcement issues in this ordinance. I don't know. I mean, I would have to defer to O'Neill on that. But as long as they're building something, we can police it. But the other situation, I'll defer to O'Neill.
We have enforcement. Well, a violation of any ordinance is a $500 a day fine. I mean, that's just the general provision of all of the Code of Ordinances. But going back to what you said, if we don't have a way, if we have a problem that is not a property owner's problem, and we do not let them do something with their property, we have to have a way to solve that problem, because basically what we're talking about is creating a moratorium on their property.
Right.
And so I don't think that unless we have some way to solve that problem within a certain period of time, we're not going to be able to say you can't use your property. I mean, and that's the issue that we run into. I mean, you could say, well, you got to do this, 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 but if it's our problem and we haven't solved it, we're going to have a time frame on that, or we're going to have to let people do it and comply with our ordinances. Because that's basically what you're doing, is you're creating a moratorium on somebody's property when you make them attempt to correct problems off site that are not their problem.
Yeah, well, and that wasn't the point. It would slow down the development or hold up the development until such time we could make the corrections in-house, with DPW staff. So, okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next thing, we had some interest on the number of permits needed, and I was curious as to the changes from what we had now. I know we listed five possible permits that we needed to get. Is there a big change from what we have to do now on permits?
I think that the very first item we talked about was really a response to that same issue about the homeowner and what all he was going to have to do to just construct a home. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the comment, but I think that that's been taken care of, unless there's something else I'm missing.
Okay. Well, there was just a concern. Does somebody have to come to DPW and get permits from 6 different agencies? I think that just depends on your particular situation.
Right. Once again, if it's a residential subdivision, that process is well laid out. If it's a commercial development, they have to pull permits. I don't think that was the question. I think the number of permits is really the concern was over that individual homeowner and how many different studies or steps.
Right.
I mean, what we're saying now is if he's in the flood zone, he needs to go sit down and visit with the floodplain administrator. Let's figure out, how severe his problem is, if he has a problem, and what ways he could go about.
Well, and just to alleviate some people's mind, you possibly have to get a permit from the Pontchartrain Levee District, but only if you have construction on or adjacent to the Mississippi River levees. So in a normal situation, people will not have to do that. You do have to get a Department of Transportation Development permit if you have a project or a driveway permit, which is we're doing now. So everything else is something that we're doing now.
Right. The intent of that Section 3 was to say, irregardless of the requirements that Ascension Parish poses on you, it does not exempt you in any way from any other federal, state, and we list them all just to be sure we're talking about, and we're not relieving someone of their responsibilities. But, like you said, if someone's not on a state highway, well, obviously they don't have to go get a DOTD permit. If they don't have wetlands, then they don't need to deal with the Corps of Engineers. But it's certainly not saying that every individual who builds a home is going to have to pull permits from all these agencies.
And that's what I wanted to make sure everybody knew. Okay, the next thing is interest in the statement of private development on any property, and it was a concern that we didn't include public and private, and I see that you have struck that out.
We have stricken the word private, and then the definition of development is in the UDC ordinance, and that definition of development is pretty basically means that if you change your if you change the lay of your land, you're developing.
Yes. Okay. And we just wanted to make sure, because we want to make sure that if we did, as a public entity, we followed the same rules and guidelines as private people. We did not want to be there. Any other changes, amendments, or suggestions?
Motion to adopt. Send to the full.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Hillingsbeck to adopt as amended tonight the drainage ordinance and send to the full council. Second by Mr. McConnell. Any further discussion? Any objection? Mrs. Zahn, please put that on the agenda, and we have unanimous consent.
When is the next meeting?
And
so I can have something drafted. I mean, I got to put it in. Okay, so I got time to put
Yes.
it. Yes. Okay. Okay.
Any further discussion?
We put it on as an introduction again?
Yeah.
Are we reintroducing
Yeah,
this
because you have to
thing, or
reread
is
it. I think
we
we
have to
reread it with all the
Is this
changes.
part of the continuation?
Well, we extended the public hearing.
No, I don't think
we?
You have to reread the amended
Right.
proposal.
But
and reopen the public hearing?
Yes, to discuss the
But
amendments.
it's not an introduction as
Right,
it was.
right.
We can,
Yeah, my motion was just to send it back.
we send it back, and we're going to have, we're going to finish the extension, and we can vote on it then. With that,
Motion adjourned.
motion to adjourn. This meeting is adjourned.
Kent, good job getting through all this.
Good job, Ken. Thank you.